What is happening with marriage in North America today? Are we living in the post-romantic age of workhorse wives, royal children, undersexed spouses, and rebel couples? Today we explore Marriage Confidential.
Brought to you by AdviceScene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
Our goal on this show is to explore all aspects of families and relationships. Who better to start the discussion than my guest, Pamela Haag. She's written an insightful and controversial book called Marriage Confidential: The Post-Romantic Age of Workhorse Wives, Royal Children, Undersexed Spouses, and Rebel Couples Who Are Rewriting the Rules. Pamela, welcome to Family Matters. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here.
I have to tell you, I loved your book.
Thank you so much.
You are not a psychologist. You're not a sociologist.
No.
Your training is, you have a PhD in history.
That's right. I'm not a psychologist, don't play one on TV, have no background in the law. I'm an historian.
And your book is not a self-help advice book.
No.
It's really your observations of what's going on out there in people's relationships.
That's right. My book is not one to read for advice. It's one to read for insight.
But the insight seems to have been motivated initially by your own marriage.
In part, it was by my own marriage and all the other marriages that I saw around me. You know, I was having all these conversations with my old friends who were just, about marriage. You know, they were still married, but in a way that was very so-so.
And that's really the topic of the book. You explore what you call the low conflict, low stress, unhappy marriage. The people that we don't see in court. They're not fighting, right. There's no high conflict. They're melancholy, they're bland, they're just not...
Right. These are marriages that aren't bad enough to leave, but aren't good enough to be fulfilling.
But you've said that these marriages account for the majority of divorces.
Yes, the marriages that are low conflict, kind of amiable but listless, the couple can get along okay, they can run a household, but there's something missing in the marriage that's really important. And divorce researchers have found that the majority, 55 to 65% of divorces, are hailing from this population. So it's not actually the dish throwers or the ones who are screaming and yelling.
I have to tell you, I may be the only family court judge that will ever interview you about your book. We see marriages like that, that's where the divorce started out that way as a low conflict divorce and then turned into very high conflict once they started having disagreements over property, money, children.
Right.
So they can become high conflict, I can tell you.
Oh yeah, it's a moving target.
For sure. Now tell me, why do you think there are so many lackluster, melancholy marriages out there?
There are a lot of reasons for them. There are a lot of reasons why they end up that way, and then there are a lot of reasons why people stay in them. We're marrying people who are more like us than ever before. You know, one of the most popular marriage vows now, wedding vows now, is that I'm marrying my best friend or my life partner. And, you know, the life partner sounds like a corporation or an HMO.
But isn't that a good thing?
It is a good thing. It's good news and bad news. You know, the good news is we're marrying people with whom we have a lot of camaraderie and
similar education
and similar experiences. But
same socioeconomic background.
Very much so.
Wouldn't you think that would be a recipe for a successful marriage because the values are the same?
Right, in some ways it is, but it's more a recipe for a successful friendship or partnership. But on the other hand, the marriage can lose that sense of specialness. Like if it becomes just like any other friendship, what's going to hold it together?
Well, maybe people's expectations of marriage are just too high. You know, you go to these Hollywood movies and you're sold this bill of goods that the passion just lasts forever. Did you see the movie The Notebook?
I haven't seen that yet.
They were still like highly passionate right to the end in their late 80s.
Right. That passion's really a perishable
Of course,
good.
One of them was demented, so maybe that
helps.
That always helps, of course. I wondered, I loved your discussion of what you call the Tom Sawyer marriage. Can you tell us what a Tom Sawyer marriage is?
The Tom Sawyer marriage. This is a kind of newfangled marriage of the post-women's liberation age. These are marriages where the wife is the dreary breadwinner to her dream-chasing husband, okay? So the husband is at home and he's pursuing a big dream. He wants to be a novelist or a poet or a pro golfer, whatever, some financially stressed dream. And meanwhile, his wife is sort of the exhausted breadwinner, sort of like the 1950s husband, is going off to a career that she doesn't really like all that much, but she can't get out of because she's the main breadwinner for the marriage.
But I got to ask you this. This was the traditional marriage for many, many years.
That's
with
right.
the roles reversed.
That's right.
So how come you lament the workhorse wives that are supporting these guys that are kind of chasing their dream of writing the next big novel? What about all those husbands out there that are slugging it out and their wife is home?
But we should want more from marriage than just flipping the roles so that the woman becomes the dream breadwinner instead of the man. And in some ways, I don't begrudge the Tom Sawyer husband what he has, because what he's doing is he's looking in his marriage and saying, well, I want a marriage that's going to support my life, and support my dreams. And that's not a bad question to ask, but the wives need to catch up.
It just seems to me that this was a predictable consequence of equality.
I think it was.
Of the women's movement.
It is to some extent, and this is one subset of marriages. This isn't every marriage, but the overall question, though, is about fairness in a marriage. You can arrange a marriage so many different ways today, but you can't have marriages where one spouse is the rock star and the other one is the backstage roadie, who's doing pizza orders and lights and things like that. So there has to be some sense that both partners are doing enough of the boring, dreary work in the marriage so that it feels fair to them.
Do you think that the institution of marriage is in trouble?
Oh, lots of people think so. Pew Research in November 2010 found that 40% of Americans think it's becoming obsolete. That's even higher for younger Americans, so marriage is trending toward feeling obsolete. Our divorce rate's stable, but it's still pretty high. We're a majority unmarried country. Living together is on the rise, so there are plenty of people who are voting with their feet and saying, I don't see what marriage is going to add. Now, some of them change their minds when they want to have children, because that's still a big imperative.
It's an important construct, for sure. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to ask Pamela about displaced professional mothers and more. Stay with us. Welcome back to our show with author Pamela Haag, who has written a fascinating book called Marriage Confidential. You're not easy on women in this book. You talk about displaced professional mothers, these type A women that were professionals that treat parenting like a profession.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that I think I'm easy on women. I'm trying to be sympathetic to everyone and to just tell their stories. And I am one of these mothers. I am one of these displaced professional moms. This is a case of, you can take the girl out of the office, but. So these are women who are used to being very high achieving in the office and everything working efficiently and having goals and benchmarks and meeting them. And then when they have a baby, it's all in chaos. And their parenting instincts are more like the office instincts.
But are these the people that are raising royal children that are in the title of your book, these overindulged kids who run the show?
I think that they're a big part of that, yes, because the parenting fashions and styles today are not laid back. The fashions are very much toward being heavily involved and trying to control every aspect of your child's life and to get really good outcomes. And
over-scheduling all their activities.
Right.
But I have to tell you, I see in my job parents who consistently are either unable or unwilling to put their children's needs ahead of their own.
Right.
So I found it refreshing that you were writing about parents who actually let their children's needs completely govern their lives, but you say that it can really affect a marriage negatively.
Right.
Like there's no more passion?
I think this is one of the tragedies of child rearing too, because a lot of children are not getting anything of what they need, getting way too little attention, and then the other children are drowning in attention. It seems like the good middle ground is kind of shrinking there. It can definitely have a negative impact not only on marriage but also on children when you're too focused on managing your kids' lives. But marriage really can become the forgotten bond when children arrive.
Parents maybe need to be a little more selfish and take some time to nurture their own relationship?
In a strange way, it sounds counterintuitive, but there are parents and husbands and wives who really do need to be a little more selfish because they've gone totally over to the other end. They've gone off the deep end on responsibility.
Do you think it's because they're guilty? They feel guilty because they're not home enough?
That could be part of it. I think that we're not at all nonchalant about our children's futures anymore. We feel like we control the outcomes.
Well, don't you? You're a mother.
Well,
You've got a son. You wrote about it in the book.
I don't have that conceit. You know, I think personality and hardwiring has a lot to do with that.
Absolutely.
There's also competition among parents and between parents. You know, to be in the best schools, to be doing the.
Well, tell me. You know, the book really focuses on melancholy marriages. A lot of people stick it out.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? If they're not happy,
right.
Is it just too much work to be bothered breaking up? Is it too expensive?
Well, expense is a huge part of it, and that's only gotten more serious since the recession started. So there are now couples who are semi-happy who might have taken the next step and ended up in your court, but instead they can't afford to get divorced. I mean, literally, they can't unload their house. They couldn't afford to set up two houses. They couldn't afford the process of getting divorced, at least in the United States. So for now, they're kind of forced into this limbo or this middle gray zone of kind of being somewhat married and somewhat divorced.
But how do they know that if they did divorce, they'd be happier?
I don't think they do.
You know, I have to tell you, I see people in my court every day that I really do wonder, and I'm not talking young people, I'm talking people who've stuck it out 15 years. Mm-hmm. They've given each other their youth.
Right.
And I have to wonder whether they are going to be any happier when they're single. It's not so easy out there.
And sometimes you're trading one problem for another, you know, especially if you've got issues around joint custody and raising the children. So, I mean, there are no good options here. You know, for men and women who find themselves in this ambivalent state where they wake up and they worry about divorce, there are no obvious answers.
Well, one of the things you write about is that a lot of women who attained equality, attained independence financially, dreamed of having it all. They thought they could have it all, mm-hmm. and it hasn't happened.
The dream of having it all became the nightmare of doing it all.
So is that what you mean by living in the post-romantic age?
It's part of it. There are a whole bunch of elements of the post-romantic age. You know, it's marrying people who are more like our best friends. It's having really different sexual mores. So some of us come into marriage already having had a big romance, but not with our husband. It means marrying later in life. So maybe the marriage is much more focused on children than it would have been for my mother's generation. Where she was really building a whole new life with her husband, and he was the first love of her life. And
you even go so far as to suggest that the problem with marriages that are just not that happy is maybe the institution of marriage itself. I mean, we know the divorce rate is high. We know that it takes a lot of work to stay with some. People are living longer. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of work to stay with someone. Should marriages maybe is there a way to reinvent the whole institution? Should they be time limited?
Right. To me, that's the most interesting part of my own book. I really think that sometimes the problem isn't your spouse and it's not you, it's marriage.
The whole construct.
To survive, marriage has to evolve. You know, it's a living institution. The circumstances of our lives are so different than they were 50 years ago, to say nothing of 100. Marriage used to work because you had no other options or choices, and that's not true today, and its old imperatives have faded. So we need to remake it. You know, maybe that would mean taking marriage sabbaticals, where occasionally a couple hits the pause button on their marriage and spends time apart, or maybe it would be thinking about marriage as not ideally forever. Maybe
would you be prepared? Would you be prepared to do that? With
take a marriage sabbatical?
Say,
oh, absolutely.
See you in a year? You really would?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, I never want you to be my partner, ever. We are going to take another break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Pamela, what exactly is a don't ask, don't tell marriage? Don't go away. Welcome back to Marriage Confidential with author Pamela Haag. Pamela, you've said in the book that the public acceptance of marital infidelity is very, very low. People do not approve of it. And yet, marital infidelity is widespread. And you say that this is really an open secret.
Absolutely. It's a shocking banality. You know, it happens all the time, and all the time we're shocked, particularly with celebrities and politicians.
Even though we shouldn't be.
We shouldn't be based on experience and even on our own lives. You know, we like to talk about marriage in black and white terms, but we live our marriages very much in shades of gray. And that characterizes a lot of the sexual ethics and mores that couples have in marriage.
So what is a don't ask, don't tell marriage?
Speaking of a shade of gray, that's very much what a don't ask, don't tell marriage would be. These are couples who are somewhat tolerant of a little non-monogamy in the marriage. So there might be a rule like the 50-mile rule, which I learned about when I was doing my research, where the couple can have a fling with someone else as long as it's outside of a 50-mile radius of their home base. Now, I had never heard of this before.
That's not so good if you commute to work and it's 60 miles. That might be a problem.
You might have to tweak it.
You have to change the radius there. No, but I know what you mean. There are people that say, well, if you're away on a business trip,
right.
Go ahead, but is the don't ask, don't tell?
Talk about it.
Don't tell me about it.
Exactly.
I don't want to know.
This can't be in our life. This can't be in our community, in the backyard. It can't be too serious. People would put all sorts of parameters on it. A lot of couples I talk to, you know, are interested in the whole phenomenon of online flirting and dating, and some of them aren't so threatened by that. This is another kind of don't ask, don't tell arrangement. There's some couples who say, you know, I don't really care if my spouse kind of flirts online, but I don't want them to actually have a physical affair. So I don't think there's any consensus about what that kind of encounter even means. Is it infidelity? Is it not?
Well, it seems to me that you're getting into really the area of an open relationship. Isn't that an open relationship if it's don't ask, don't tell?
I think there's a huge spectrum, and in Marriage Confidential, I really try to talk about the entire spectrum of extramarital sex, which ranges from conventional affairs where there's cheating involved and betrayal and lying, to these gray zone affair tolerating marriages, to marriages that end up not being as upset by the infidelity as they might have thought hypothetically, you know, when it actually happens.
Well, did you find
marriages that are indeed open, that are sort of reviving the old chestnut from the 1970s of the open marriage.
But is there any research that would support the proposition that an open marriage is, you're more likely to stay together long term?
The only actual research that I've seen on this, and there's not a lot, you know, that's done by scholars, the research I've seen says that they're no happier or less happy than other marriages.
Really?
So
what does that tell you?
I think what it tells me is that the gold standard, and that's a timeless gold standard for a good marriage, is honesty and respect, commitment, trying to follow your rules, whatever they may be.
But you both have to agree on them.
You do.
And you have to be honest.
And there would have to be genuine consent involved in that sort of relationship. If one partner doesn't want to do it, yeah, I don't think that's going to work out.
So the real big issue, it seems to me, is deception. You know, certainly my impression is that when a spouse feels betrayed, lied to, deceived,
right,
these are really unforgivable or very hard to forgive.
They're extremely difficult to forgive. I mean, there's that old line from the therapist from the 70s, you know, was it the sex or the lie that hurt?
Yeah, well, that's a good question.
It is a good question, and I actually think we should ask that question earnestly, because in some cases, I believe it really is the lie that is the hardest to get over, but couples who agree beforehand that they're going to have some kind of non-monogamous marriage, it can work for some couples.
Now, you've mentioned the internet. I've got to ask you, you had a very controversial sentence in your book. You said, Facebook is going to be the downfall of many a marriage. Why?
Yes, I was
thought
quoting a friend
on
of mine.
Facebook.
Yeah. Among the many things that Facebook is bringing into our lives. Facebook and social technology, social media, are changing marriage at every step in a marriage's life cycle. So once we're married, the thing that's so interesting about Facebook is that it just kind of brings the temptation right to your wall, you know, and friends you. I mean, before, at least you had to go out and look for temptation, you know, at least there was some effort involved in that.
Right.
It's much easier now with Facebook and with social media.
But aren't there worse websites like these? When I say worse, I mean more direct websites for finding someone.
Sure.
I mean, there's matchmaking websites. There's websites that
You
are
know, the thing
specifically
about-
geared?
Well, the thing about Facebook, though, is that it makes it easy to be self-deceiving because you can start up a correspondence, say, with an old boyfriend or girlfriend, and it's very innocent at first. And
Someone
then-
you used to be involved with.
Exactly. So, like, your romantic past is always there. You know, it's always lingering. You know.
Do you think people they go on to try to find?
Well, one of the
Lost
interesting
loves?
things is in Britain, divorce petitions that were filed online last year, 1 in 5 mentioned Facebook.
1 in
And-
5 divorce
yes.
petitions mentions Facebook.
And not in a sort of
I guess
happy,
that's like a new kind
flattering-
of social network thing, right? That wasn't what they had in mind when they created it.
All these things always take on some kind of sexual element, I guess. But yes, this was 20% of the divorce petitions.
That makes me think that a lot of people are pining for somebody that they used to be involved with and want to find them again.
I agree. It's uncanny because your past is in your present. You know, there are things from your past that are always in your present. And with social media generally, it's just much easier to hook up with people. It's much easier to start off, you know, an innocent correspondence that can take an inflection towards something riskier.
Now, you took a risky step. You actually registered online on one of those websites for people that were looking to have an affair anonymously.
Right.
And you made it very clear in the book you didn't actually follow through, but
Right, no, I
you're a
didn't.
little temptress. Like, how many hearts did you break on the
I'm a
internet
dangerous
while you were
figure.
doing your research? I thought that
Collateral
was
damage.
it was a fascinating read because you were doing research and you learned a lot about what kind of people are looking to have affairs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for one thing, it was brutally efficient. You know, on these sites, if you enter in your zip code, you know, within 1 second, I could have, in the one case, I hit 200 potential hits, I guess you call it, applicants, you know, for this job.
But that's because you told them you were really hot, which
No,
is
no.
absolutely true. We will be back after this message with our remaining moments with our delightful guest, Pamela Haag. Please stay with us. Pamela, you said in the book that you should live your marriage like you're on vacation. What do you mean?
Well, when we're on vacation, we pay attention to each other. We have new things to look at and react to and talk about. Pleasure is given some pride of place, you know, in our lives. All of those characteristics can help make a marriage happy even when it's on staycation, when you're not on vacation.
Good advice. Very good advice. If you're interested in finding out whether somebody else with some authority thinks what you've been thinking but haven't had the guts to say, take a read in this book. It's a page turner, Marriage Confidential. Thank you so much for being here
Thank
with me,
you so
Pamela.
much.
Thank you for joining us. From all of us here at Family Matters, see you next time.